I'm happy to welcome all of you today. I'll get it out right yet. And to welcome David Cobb, who is a people's lawyer who's sued corporate polluters, lobbied elected officials, run for public office, and been arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience. He serves on the board of the California Public Banking Alliance and is co-coordinator of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. He ran for Attorney General of Texas in 2002, pledging to revoke the charters of corporations that routinely violate the law. In 2004, he was the Green Party nominee for president, and his demands for recounts in multiple states helped to launch the election integrity movement that ended electronic, that is, black box voting systems, where you can't check and make sure that it was properly recorded. He co-founded Move to Amend and co-authored a proposed constitutional amendment to abolish the doctrine of corporate personhood. In 2016, he served as campaign manager for the Jill Stein Jammu Baraka presidential campaign. I may have mutilated that, sorry. He also co-founded Cooperation Humboldt, is a board member of Transition US, a member of the North Coast People's Alliance, and serves as a fellow for the Liberty Tree Foundation for a Democratic Revolution. Recently, he worked with the Wiyot tribe as an advancement manager for Dishkamu Humboldt, a cutting-edge new community land trust operated by the Wiyot tribe that has been doing fantastic work, by the way, in developing housing for the less fortunate. And it's been causing a lot of stir. So he seems to be on the cutting edge frequently of new things, important things for the community, and we very much appreciate him being here. It's all yours, David.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, for that really beautiful introduction. It is very much appreciated. And it is true. I have attempted to use whatever skills and talents I have and whatever educational privilege I have to try to create the society that I believe that we deserve and that we were promised as children. You see, I can still remember being a little boy and being so proud to be an American because I was taught that my country, America, stood for liberty, justice, and equality. And not only that, but my country would help bring liberty, justice, and equality to the entire world. And it reminds me, for those of you who may know the poet Langston Hughes, the great poem, Let America Be America Again, the America that never was, but was promised to be. And so it is in that spirit that I have this conversation. You see, I do believe that Americans want and deserve liberty, justice, and equality, but not because we're Americans, but because we're human beings. Because I would argue that Palestinians, Jews, South Africans, Mexicans, Chinese, every human being want and deserve liberty, justice, and equality. And I have come to the conclusion that our systems are the problem. We have systems that codify, incentivize, and promote extraction, power over, dominator principles. And so therefore, we have really good people in a very bad system. And it is very difficult to be able to create the kind of policies that the majority wants. So it's in that spirit that I want to introduce the concept of public banking. And I am very happy to tell you that I'm entering into this conversation as a leader of the California Public Banking Alliance, and that there is here in Humboldt a local effort. The group is called the North Coast Progressive Alliance. The North Coast Progressive Alliance meets online on the third Monday of every month at 6 p.m. So our next meeting is April 15. I'll make sure to drop my contact information into the chat and share it with folks if you'd like to get involved in that effort. But for now, I want to make sure that we have a robust conversation about just what the heck public banking is and what the state of public banking movement is in California. And I would ask either Marina or Jane if you could make it full screen so that when I start to share my screen, it'll actually show up for everybody. So can you spotlight me or the screen? Or when I share screen, perhaps it'll just do that.
It will do that. And everybody can move their screen over.
Great.
On the right
So,
side, you can just push the people off. And we can pinpoint you if you wish.
got it. So what you're looking at now is why public banks are better for livable cities and the environment. And this is my effort to literally lay out our assessment. Other people may have a different perception, but I want to really own. We believe that the big corporate banks, Bank of America, Citibank, JP Morgan, we know for a fact that they are huge investors in the fossil fuel industry. In fact, since the Paris Climate Agreement of the COP in 2016, they've already invested an additional $4.6 trillion in fossil fuels. We know that there is a huge lack of credit available to small, locally owned businesses, and we know that corporate banks tend to finance luxury housing, often at the expense of affordable housing or other innovative housing alternatives. And as a former employee of the Wiyot tribes, Dishkama Humboldt, I can share with you, it is really challenging to find financing for affordable housing. So when we say that public banks can be a solution, the question is, what the heck is a public bank? And I don't mean to be coy when I say public banks are owned by the public. That is to say, they are banks, they're lending and depository institutions that are actually owned by a government entity, like a city or a county, and specifically with a nonprofit public purpose. In other words, every other bank in the United States of America, except the Public Bank of North Dakota, is actually a private entity operated for private purposes, operated for the benefit of the shareholders who own the bank. Unlike a private bank, public banks are governed by a charter that actually creates them and says that they are owned by some particular government entity. So public banks are governed by financial professionals, just like private banks, but also community representatives that are independent of politicians. Public banks receive deposits from institutions and use the lending power to benefit residents with affordable housing, small business loans, improvement of infrastructure, and other community needs. In other words, the public bank that is currently being championed in California is not a bank for private consumer lending. It is specifically the depositors would only be governmental entities, and their purpose is to serve the needs of the communities rather than maximizing the profits for shareholders. So literally, it's a way to democratize finance. So here's a brief history of public banking in California, because with an all-volunteer effort, several of us have been advocating for public banking, and happy to share that in 2019, Governor Newsom signed Assembly Bill 857, the Public Banking Act, and it literally created and authorized municipalities to begin the process to establish public banks chartered by the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. This is the first time in 150 years that a state legislature has moved to legalize municipal public banks. So we like to say the choice is ours. A private bank that fuels fossil fuel, gun manufacturing, private prisons, and a stock market, or a banking system that supports a true green economy, that supports the community and local business, and supports affordable housing. Literally, a public bank means public money for public good. And by public good, we want to be clear. It can be public libraries, parks, hospitals, pools, transit, public schools. The reality is, AB 857 has been formed. It allows the creation of up to 10 local public banks. And the question is, can we get public banks happening at the local or regional level in California? I am happy to tell you that since that public bank law was passed, we have 4 communities that are very far along. The San Francisco Public Banking Coalition has already passed in San Francisco and produced plans for a public bank. It's been submitted to the Board of Supervisors. It has already, it will be voted on. They're working to secure funding and financing or finalizing the governance structure. That is, what is the charter going to say? But wait, there's more. Public Banking East Bay has completed a viability study. They're interviewing board of directors. They've already hired a chief executive officer. They are securing additional funding in order to collateralize the bank. Public Banking Los Angeles worked very closely with the Jane family and the Berrigan Institute to produce a comprehensive report on what a public bank can do for Los Angeles. They're in the process of hiring a consultant to go through the process, working with the Department of Financial Innovation in order to go through the process of creating that public bank. And the fourth is the Public Bank of Sacramento. They have already secured financing for a viability study. They already have the support of their city treasurer, the city mayor, and the county board of supervisors. So those are the 4 localities where public banking is already well underway. Now, I'm going to use the San Francisco Public Bank because it's arguably the most advanced, but most other California public banks have objectives very similar. In the legislation, if you take a look at the San Francisco Public Banking county/city ordinance, I think folks know San Francisco is unique. They are both a city and a county, but they have 3 specific objectives. The first, affordable, energy efficient housing to protect, preserve, and produce. That is, to protect tenants and homeowners in their homes, to preserve, update, and improve existing housing with insulation and energy efficient appliances, and then to produce additional housing, especially permanently affordable energy efficient housing for families, especially those who are currently renters. The second objective of the San Francisco Public Bank is for climate justice investments, and that is for climate mitigation projects, for any number of solarization efforts, for alternative energy and sustainable energy, etc. And then the last objective of the San Francisco Public Bank is very specifically to support small, independently run businesses, prioritizing people of color and women who have historically had challenges and difficulty in getting financing. Another thing that's interesting about the public banking process is the commitment to what is known as the triple bottom line. Many of you may have heard of this, but it is actually codified within the public bank, and that is profit is still part of the process. But unlike a private bank, where profit is the only thing that they're legally responsible to their shareholders for, profit is one of 3. Yes, public banks must be responsible with their money and not lose public money. So profit is absolutely part of a public banking process. But the public banking process also includes not centering exclusively, but ensuring that people oriented, so what is best for the community as well as the workers within that bank. And then lastly, planet. That is to say that the investments that a public bank makes must be sustainable, must be beneficial to the environment, must bring us back into the proper balance that existed before the power over dominating systems like capitalism and white supremacy and settler colonialism and heteropatriarchy. As my mentors and friends in the indigenous community remind me, every human being descends from indigenous people. there was a time when all humans were living in right relationship and balance with each other and Mother Earth. And we are attempting to return to that level of balance. We believe that public banks are part of that process. Remember, public banks are not for profit. They aren't pressured by shareholders to maximize profit. So they can be patient investors willing to wait longer for returns over a longer period of times. And their investments can include things like flood and fire protection to protect our community. They can invest in affordable carbon neutral housing complexes with community solar and public transportation options. In addition, the deposits into a public bank are government agencies and institutions. So public banks work together with local financial institutions like credit unions, like community banks and community development financial institutions who already know the needs of the community and can benefit from the greater access to capital. Again, individuals will not be opening accounts within public banks. So the California Public Banking Act was very explicitly designed not to attempt to compete with credit unions or community banks. Now, we want to be clear, we're very excited about how far we've come, but we still do have some challenges. The first is FDIC approval. That stands for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The state law that was passed does state that a public bank must be insured by the FDIC, and the FDIC has never done this before. And it is currently controlled by, or at least funded and have experience with corporate banks. So we are in a very challenging position now to help people understand both the benefits of the public bank and also the fact, again, I'll say it again, that public banks are not going to be competing against credit unions or community banks. The second challenge we're facing is to secure the capital and lending funds in order to what's known as collateralize public banks. That's because, again, these are local or regional public banks, which means that the local municipal communities have to come up with a starting cost, which can be quite substantial. That's why, quite bluntly, Humboldt County is not large enough to collateralize a public bank. So for more information broadly, go to californiapublicbankingalliance.org. I'm going to now stop sharing the screen. Remind folks, as I did at the very beginning, that there is a local group that is working on public banking. It's the North Coast Progressive Alliance. If you're interested in learning more about the North Coast Progressive Alliance, you can go to the website or contact me directly at davidkcobb@gmail.com. We meet online on the third Monday of every month at 6 o'clock. So our next meeting will be April 15, tax day. So an auspicious time to come to a North Coast Progressive Alliance meeting and learn more about our efforts locally. And I'll conclude with this. When I say our efforts locally, remember, I'm being very transparent. We do not have sufficient collateral or municipal deposits to be able to properly collateralize a public bank. So instead, what we have been doing is supporting efforts at those 4 communities that are the most advanced and supporting the statewide network with the idea that as soon as a public bank exists in one of those other communities, that we would convince the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors and the county treasurer to become a depositor into that bank. We could get our cities like the city of Eureka or Arcata or Fortuna to become depositors in a public bank instead of Wall Street banks. We could even get the various independent school districts, or our water districts, our fire districts, our soil and conservation districts. Any government account could become a depositor into a public bank and reap the rewards that we've just chatted about. So at this point, I'm going to pause the formal presentation and open it up for conversation or questions or comments. And Jane or Marina, I will leave it to you to decide what's the proper protocol to do that, and whether you typically record the discussion or whether you'd like to stop the discussion and have a more freewheeling conversation.
Well, we do continue to record, so we're open for any questions that you may have. And you said San Francisco. I have a couple.
Sure.
Okay, so the concept is that instead of the city of Arcata putting its money that it gets from the state or taxes that it gets, these would all go in a public bank, and any interest therefrom would go to the city.
That's
Right?
correct.
So
In
you'd
essence,
end
right?
up.
So, so that's a thing, but it's actually, Jane, actually a small benefit. The interest is a small benefit. The really great benefit of a public bank is the ability to borrow money, right? And so I'll use it as an example. Public infrastructure projects. The data is quite clear. When you look at any public project, 40 to 45% of the cost of the project is literally the cost of borrowing money. I'm going to say that again. 40 to 45% of the cost of every public infrastructure project is just the privilege of borrowing money from private banks. So with a public bank, if the county of Humboldt or the city of Arcata or Eureka were a depositor in a public bank, then the cost of simply borrowing money would go drastically down. So that's a direct savings to the taxpayers. So yes, the interest is one thing, but far more important is the ability to borrow money at substantially lower rates, because the public bank does not have the need to provide a return to investment to the shareholders of that public bank.
So let's take an example. The marine terminal. Okay. We're getting tons of money allegedly from the federal government. I don't know where that money goes, whether it's actually directly already here, and whether it's sitting in Wells Fargo or where it might be sitting. But this money would then sit in the public bank and earn interest, and the public bank would have investment counselors who would determine how to invest that money while it's sitting there. And therefore, we get a return on the capital before it's being committed and used. Is that how that works? And
that's part of it. So I got to
make
stop you, because this is important to understand. Most folks are unaware of a concept known as fractional reserve banking, which is how banks literally create money. And the way that works is when there is a deposit into a bank is allowed to lend additional money, including money that they do not have. For example, I'll try to make a very concrete example, Jane. If you decide to buy my house, if my house is for sale, and we'll make it super easy, for $100,000. Well, you go to the bank and you get a line of credit for $100,000, right? Well, the bank doesn't have, you don't get a wheelbarrow with $100,000 of cash and bring it over to me. It's all done with zeros and ones, right? It's abstractions. But the bank doesn't have to have $100,000 of actual cash assets. They're literally allowed to loan. They only have to have 10% of that money in cash assets. They create the other 90% out of whole cloth simply through the magic of fractional reserve banking. And that process is part of the reason that bankers are so rich, because they're controlling the creation of the money supply.
So the more they lend, the more money they make.
Correct.
The more money they
As long
create
as the
out of
money
whole
is
cloth.
paid back. And that's the point. That's why banking regulators exist. And banks are properly regulated. And I want to use this as an example or to make the point. The public banks will equally be regulated. I do want to be very clear that the law requires that public banks be treated the same as private banks for the purposes of insurance, for the purposes of collateralization, the purposes of chartering the bank. So public banks will be under the same level of scrutiny as private banks.
So there will be an investment group, or that there will be bankers as part of the public bank that will determine what to invest in. They have the ability not just to, they don't have to return to shareholders. In essence, the government entity is the shareholder.
Correct. The government entity is the shareholder, and you are equally correct. There will be financial professionals and bankers actually in control of those processes. That's literally written into AB 857. And I see, Barbara, you're shaking. Barbara is waving her hand, so I want to get some other voices into the mix. Barbara?
You're muted still, Barbara.
Okay, is that all right? Okay, I don't want to interrupt Jane here, but she brought up a really important point, and I think that I'd like to hear more about it because it's my main concern. Um, the concern about such an entity as a public bank means that the people who are running the show in terms of deciding who and what and where to invest are they're not particularly, well, they're not by definition almost governed by highest and best use of return. It's not a capital kind of situation. So it seems to me that, Jane used the word public counselors. Where do these folks come from? Maybe they're bankers, maybe they're not, but they're probably fairly politicized. And you even say that because um, they're going to favor projects which are in the public good, but who determines what that public good is? There's a lot of controversy over what kind of projects that this kind of um, system would finance, and whether they're the highest and best use of funds. The market has a way of regulating that by success stories of things that have worked in the past. I'm not sure that a philosophy good as it is about having a higher and better use determined by a small group of people who nobody elects, is in charge of, or nobody pays. It's not a competitive environment. So what keeps it on course?
Well, yeah, I will say, Barbara, you've got a lot of assumptions there, which I'll address the question, but who elects the current private bankers?
Who elects
Nobody. This is the point. And you're right. The charter itself would describe what you want the public bank to do. And remember that the 857 specifically requires that the banking administration and what's known as the C-suite, the executives who run the bank, have got to actually be hired the same way that that a city or county hires a city manager or other staff. So
well, having looked at how that goes in a typical government situation, I'm not very encouraged by that because these folks are not very savvy about what's going on. They're also very political at times, and political opinions get split about where we should spend money on certain projects. So without the discipline of the marketplace, I'm leery. I wish it could work, but I've seen too much public money getting wasted on projects that people really are not their priority. If you really put it up to a vote, so to speak, it would not be the priority of most people. It's the priority of little interest groups within that system. So where's the safeguard of that?
Well, I would just simply point to the only public bank that exists in the United States today, and that is in the liberal bastion of North Dakota, where in that very conservative, both politically and culturally conservative state, you have the only public bank operating, the Public Bank of North Dakota. And we have good data for 120 years of the Public Bank of North Dakota providing credit and research for small family farmers and ranchers, but they are also providing money to the rest of the state. And what we know is during the most recent credit crisis of 2008, North Dakota was the only state that did not experience that credit crisis. So, I appreciate that you've got concerns. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and tell you that there is no such thing as a guarantee. What I can tell you is that a public bank operates in the public interest. And if you are concerned about the democratic process, I can only tell you that's what it is.
Well, the use of this money is coming from the taxpayers, right? I mean, that's the only source. The entities in the organization in San Francisco Public Bank or whatever it is, that money is ultimately coming from the taxpayers. I don't see that the taxpayers have a lot of say in where that money gets spent. Outside, I mean, there are elections. That's why we have elections and ballots and referendums and all that sort of thing. They work not too well, but I don't see anything checking or proposing how it's going to work under this kind of a system when only a small board of people who are basically not directly responsible to the public has the power of controlling the purse there.
Okay. I mean, again, I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm simply answering questions to the best of my ability.
Okay.
I have a thought maybe that through the creation of the public law that is passed by a jurisdiction, I presume, to create this public bank, right? It's not the state that drafted the law for the San Francisco Public Bank, right? It's the city of San Francisco, right?
Correct.
Okay, so they determine the terms of supervision and allocation of funds, right? And the
Correct.
degree of oversight, who gets hired, who gets fired, how the investments go. So there is public control over that law at the local level, right? And that control is exerted through the Board of Supervisors or the equivalent for the city and county of San Francisco. So by how that law is drafted, which can then be revised, presumably, although it would have to go through rechartering, I would presume if they wanted to change the law, they'd have to change the charter. But if everybody accepts the charter, now I don't know whether those charters are submitted to the public for approval. Are they, David?
Well, the answer is no. The charter is a function of the county or city that's actually creating the bank, right? So again, I want to be really transparent about that. I will say that the public bank entity is accountable to the public through transparent practices, the detailed annual public disclosures, the semi-annual audits that are required, that are done by independent public accounting firms. I mean, at the end of the day, it is as accountable as any other democratic institution. And if folks really don't support the idea of democratizing finance and want it only to be done by private individuals in the private market, then public banks are not that. I think that's actually should be honestly addressed and not pretend as if there is a guarantee. There is not.
But it is a viable alternative. It has worked in practice.
Listen, I want to be clear. It's not
Yeah.
only worked in practice for the last 150 years in the US, almost every other country has public banking. And I would argue that one of the reasons that most other countries have things like universal health care and have a higher and better, in my opinion, standard of living and a better social contract is because they have democratized finance. That's part of it.
So how do you, is there, I think people need dollars and cents understanding of this. So if 40% of a project is being siphoned off to investors, is that what it boils down to? Or CEOs of banks and the costs of private banks? Then the project might only have to pay 15% or 20% for the financing from a public bank.
Correct.
Is there some legitimate, I mean, are there examples that we could say, this is why this matters? And by the way, the government doesn't have to take as much taxes from you, sales taxes, et cetera, or it can make investments in education, whatever have you, because it didn't have to spend this money.
Again, that's like that. Every public infrastructure project, the cost of borrowing money alone is about 40 to 45% of the cost of that entity. And public banks will not have that. There'll still be some level of proper administration and collateralization, but it'll just go drastically down. And you can look at any other of the national public banks in other countries, especially in Western Europe, or you can take a look at the Public Bank of North Dakota and compare and contrast those numbers. I mean, that's actually how public infrastructure projects work. Like you have to still, they all still have to be paid for. They all still have to pencil out. You still have to buy the materials. You have to pay the workers. You have to do all of this. And this is why I'm honoring
But
Barbara's.
The overhead is basically substantially less for running this operation. And that difference in the project is money back to the city or county or entity that has it.
That's correct.
That can then use for other projects. I think it would really help to have concrete examples that you could show people. Here's what happened when it was public. Here's what it would happen if it were private. That would maybe really
I don't have that to show you.
I know you don't. I don't expect you to have it right now. I'm just saying for future use and trying to convince people to do this. I mean, right now we have this huge problem with financing people's pensions. We're way behind. I can't quite understand when everybody else has been making so much money, how CalPERS has lost so much money. And everybody's having to pony up so much more, and it's eating into the local and regional governments and their ability to maintain services. But how do we convey to people? Because at some point, when San Francisco has its act together and has this public bank going, we have to decide whether to invest in it. So we need concrete examples of why it matters. And if that can be put together, I think that would greatly help people to understand the implications and why it would be desirable to do. Because we'll have that decision to make, right, down the road.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm curious if there's any other comments or questions.
Barbara?
No, the whole concept is something that I think needs a lot more fleshing out how it works.
Yeah, that's why I said we need concrete examples. If we had those, if we had a layout of how European banks work. I mean, we know they have central banks, but we don't know how that interacts with.
I mean,
that's the reason I want to repeat.
It's a matter of
feasibility studies. They're like those exist in those communities that are actually much further along. I am not investing a great deal of time or effort into this because our former tax assessor, was a huge supporter of public banks, but was very clear to me, we don't have the collateralization to actually create a public bank. So this is the reason that I've made it a secondary thing that I do, because we can't collateralize one. We just don't have the level of deposits that it would take.
When you say collateralize, what are our sources of deposits?
Well, the sources of deposits are the accounts that the various governmental entities have that they put into currently into Wall Street banks.
Okay.
So they're
And
their deposits.
we don't have a concept of exactly what those accounts are for a given jurisdiction.
Well, I mean, it would require quite a bit of research to be able to go through that. But again, the auditor that was already a supporter of public banks told me that there's no way, and every expert that I've talked to has agreed with that. So I have not done so, because that's just
no, doesn't make
additional
sense.
work for no benefit.
But we'll get that information from San Francisco, from
Yes,
Sacramento, etc. We'll be able to see.
Correct. When there is, and I'm quite convinced that there will be a public bank, and when there is, then there'll be data to look at.
Yeah, and then we'll have the ability to determine whether it makes money or saves money for Arcata or Eureka or the county.
To be sure.
To compare the two. Fantastic. Okay. Well, you've satisfied some of my questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And again, like, I understand that this is a new concept. It has not been done in 150 years. There is, however, the Public Bank of North Dakota with a track record that can be looked at. And then there are public banks throughout the world with track records that can be looked at. And I'll just end with this. I would argue that the track record of Wall Street is pretty bad, actually, that they have been financing war. They have been financing fossil fuel projects that are driving the climate crisis. And for most of us who got involved in public banking, it was specifically because of our work with the divest movement to try to get public dollars out of Wall Street banks that were funding fossil fuels. And what we discovered was credit unions and community banks could not handle that level of money. And that's what brought me into trying to learn more about public banking to democratize finance. So it is a learning journey that I'm on. I'm not pretending as if I have all of the answers. And whenever people like Barbara raise good, valid concerns, I want to honor that those are good and valid concerns.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? I'm curious about what you think is going to happen when we end up with the digital dollar.
I defer that question. It is beyond the scope of my understanding or expertise. I understand the concept of blockchain. I understand the concepts of these digital currencies, but if I don't understand something, I don't support it, and I don't understand how that money is being privatized. I just don't get it.
I understand it's coming. I read some things where they're freaking out. It's like, oh my God, they're going to have control over your money. They can just cut you off. I mean,
well, I would encourage an OLLI brown bag on somebody who is. I know that there are I know plenty of advocates and supporters of that. I'd be curious to hear it laid out in a way. To me, everything that I hear about Bitcoin and other kinds of currencies like that, it just sounds like speculation to me. It doesn't seem real.
Yeah.
And apparently it uses a lot of energy. And
that's an enormous
something
amount.
you really, I can't go there. We're already using too much energy. Why would we go somewhere that's going to use even more?
Because they can make money.
Yeah, the ledgering process, there are literally requirements for these huge server farms to simply do the computation that is required. And again, I don't understand it, but I think that Patricia Ann has made a very profoundly important point, and that is the technology simply to do the computation of the what's known as the ledgering is a hugely energy intensive process. Yet another reason that I'm not a supporter.
Well, unfortunately, we seem to be stuck with it, and that's the direction we're going. Hey, everybody, thanks so much for coming. David, thanks for explaining this. We really appreciate it. We wish you luck with this adventure, and thank you for the many things you have started up and created, like Cooperation Humboldt, working with the Wiyot tribe. You've done great stuff.
Oh,
And
thank you so much. Well,
keep on
thank
keeping
you.
on. Huh?
Thank you, Jane. And I really want to, again, say to Barbara, thank you for the good, hard questions. I hope that you felt respected and that we engaged as trying to figure things out as opposed to a, battle.
Well, thank you very much. I do feel that. It's just that there are a lot of big issues, and I haven't figured out in my mind, at least, how it could work, this public structure that we have. And I hope there's a way. I hope there's a better way. We don't have a great way, so maybe something can come along that'll help. I'd be
All
happy
right.
to see that.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much. And I
Thank
want to
you.
thank everybody at OLLI. Thanks for coming in. Bye, y'all.
And I want to let you know that on April 8th, we're going to have an update on Life Plan Humboldt with Ann Lindsay. They keep making progress and having new adventures. And you're welcome to come back and find out about what's going on and support it. So thank you so much for supporting the Brown Bag Lunch program. We try to bring ideas and topics to you that might be of interest or of interest to our community, and appreciate your attendance and your participation in OLLI. And don't forget our courses. We need to make some money, Keep joining, keep coming. Take care, everybody. Happy April Fool's Day. May we not be foolish with our money.